before the charge destined to be marked as a miracle began. The air was filled with dust baked by the scorching sun and the chill of metal. Baldwin IV sat atop a tall warhorse. His hands were wrapped in thick linen bandages, for the tips of his fingers had long lost all sensation. His iconic silver mask gleamed in the sunlight, hiding the already shattered face beneath. Behind him were only 500 weary knights. On the horizon lay Saladin's 26,000 undefeated lions. Tonight, let us accompany the gently flickering hearth fire and this story that requires no effort to remember, and walk together into his real life. This is not just a story about a miracle, but a record of how a person, before their flesh completely rots away, allows their will to arrive at eternity first. Baldwin IV, the 16-year-old leper king, would on that bloody afternoon prove to the world that mathematics can never calculate the courage of the desperate. Jerusalem in 1177 was not the golden holy city of paintings. It was a dying body gasping in the wind and sand. The walls were mottled and crumbling. Water sources were drying up. The soldiers guarding it were fewer than the students in an ordinary school. Baldwin IV took the crown at such a desperate moment. He knew he did not have much time. Leprosy was then seen as the curse of God. It would peel away your sense of touch, your sight, and your dignity, layer by layer, like an onion. Yet this young man's mind was remarkably clear. His nervous system was dying, but his logic was as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. When he discovered that Saladin's great army had bypassed the strong fortresses and was charging straight into the undefended heartland, he made a decision that made all his old ministers tremble. He would not die behind those dying walls. He would take everything he had left and intercept that beast in the midst of expanding its territory. At that time, Saladin was at the peak of his power. He had united Egypt and Syria, so confident that he had already sent messengers ahead with news of his imminent victory. In Saladin's calculation, Baldwin IV was just a cripple waiting to die on a sickbed. And cripples do not fight back. To catch up with Saladin, Baldwin IV ordered a near-crazy forced march. In 36 hours, this battered force crossed 45 miles of desert, a limit even for healthy men. We can only imagine Baldwin IV's pain on horseback. His joints were swelling. Every inch of movement felt like being torn by jagged teeth. Because his legs were too weak to grip the horse's flanks, his attendants had to pioneer the use of leather straps to bind him to the saddle. His sword was also tightly tied to a wrist that could no longer close into a fist, as if he himself had become one with a weapon. Throughout the march, he constantly asked his scouts, "Is Saladin's formation scattered? Is Saladin busy looting?" Whenever he received an affirmative answer, the silver-masked boy would reveal a chilling smile. He did not need strength. He needed the other's arrogance. That was the only crack he could exploit. Baldwin IV knew deeply that a man who has nothing left to lose is the most terrifying variable in the world. At 2 in the afternoon on November 25th, the dunes of Montgessart undulated like waves of the sea. Baldwin IV finally saw the enemy's backs on the horizon. Saladin had made the greatest mistake of his life. Believing Jerusalem was already within his grasp, he had allowed his soldiers to scatter and plunder. When the gleam of the silver mask pierced the eyes of Saladin's commanders, panic spread like plague through the camp of over 20,000 men. Baldwin IV raised that bandaged hand. It was a gesture that couldn't even bend a single knuckle, yet it weighed more than 1,000 tons. 500 knights formed a desperate and elegant wedge formation. The red cross cloaks of the Knights Templar flapped loudly in the wind. When the charge horn sounded, Baldwin IV was at the very front. He could not feel his wounds tearing open, nor the chill of arrows grazing his skin, because the pain had left him. In its place was a kind of divine tranquility. The knights, watching their rotting, godlike king, let out a war cry that sounded like weeping. That cry contained their resentment against fate and their final loyalty to the Holy Land. The Battle of Montgessart ceased to be a contest the moment the two sides clashed. Because Saladin's elite were facing a group of madmen. These knights knew they would not return. So they did not defend. They only attacked, only slaughtered, only advanced. Baldwin IV rampaged through the enemy ranks. His body, which no longer bled red but oozed yellow fluid, became the strangest totem on the battlefield. Because Saladin had left himself no route of retreat, the routed army was crushed into a narrow valley, becoming stalks of wheat beneath a harvester. In just 3 hours, 20,000 of Saladin's warriors turned into white bones on the dunes. Blood stained the earth for 3 square miles. Saladin himself, under the desperate protection of his bodyguards, fled on the fastest camel, escaping under the cover of night. It was the only time in his life, as a great conqueror, that he was utterly shattered by the crippled boy he had looked down upon. After the battle, when the knights finally untied the exhausted, unconscious Baldwin IV from his horse, they found his bandages soaked through with pus and blood. Yet even in his delirium, he was still clutching that broken, notched sword tightly. The miracle of Montgessard bought precious 8 years of peace for Jerusalem. But this victory also completely drained Baldwin's life. In the years after the battle, his condition deteriorated rapidly. His vision slowly faded, eventually plunging him into permanent darkness. Yet he still sat on his litter, appearing at the front lines every time Saladin attempted revenge. Saladin once lamented, countless times, "Why would God give such a magnificent soul to such a ruined vessel?" In 1185, at just 24 years old, Baldwin IV closed his eyes in his silent palace. When he left, he did not even have a single inch of unblemished skin remaining. But he left behind a kingdom that was still intact, still standing. His successors, in their internal power struggles, quickly lost the holy city he had defended with his own life. But his silver mask remains forever in the memory of history, reminding future generations. The flesh is temporary, but the will is eternal. Deep within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, Baldwin IV's tombstone is so simple, it is almost shabby. He has no world-famous statue like Leonidas, nor does he have a victor's paean. But the legacy he truly left behind is that dignity that refuses to bow, even in the face of ultimate suffering. He tells us that mathematics can explain the world, but what can change the world? Even a rotting body can do this. Tonight's story slowly comes to its end here. May the tenacity of Baldwin IV accompany you to sleep. In this complicated and chaotic world, may you also hold on to the purest domain within your heart, untouched by pain and sorrow. The little hearth fire is about to die out. May you have a peaceful and profound dream. Good night.